Okay. Dale,
Yes.
Terry,
Present.
Michelle.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and 3 board members are present, so we do have a quorum. So we can go ahead and start the meeting, and we can do the welcome chair.
Yeah, okay. And how about introductions? I see, could we have those who are not members of the committee introduce yourself briefly, please?
Would you like me to call them off so that they will?
Yeah, that would be
let
fine.
me do that. Okay.
Yes,
So
fine.
what we'll do is let's start with the board. So you can go ahead and introduce yourself, Dale.
Yeah, Dale Harrington,
Okay.
CAB board.
And then Terry.
Morning, Terry Dunn, CAB board member. Glad to be here.
Okay. All right. And then Michelle, please.
Michelle Carter, new CAP board. Something. Something, everything, anything Crawford says, apparently.
Okay. And then we'll have staff introduce themselves. So my name is Monique. I'm from the Office of Reentry and Justice. And Denise.
Hello, everyone. I'm Denise Zabkevich. I'm with the Office of Reentry and Justice.
Christina.
Hi, good morning, everybody. This is Christina Jackson, also with the Office of Reentry and Justice.
Melvin.
Good morning, everybody. Melvin Russell. I'm the Assistant Chief Probation Officer with the Probation Department.
And is it Elisa or Alyssa?
I had it right the first time.
Elisa.
Yeah, hi.
Please, hi.
Everyone,
Please
Elisa Robinson with the Office of Supervisor Diane Burgess. Good morning.
Okay. And then we'll introduce CAB members. Ozzie Carter.
Good morning, all. Ozzie Carter, CAB member.
And Crawford Carpenter.
Crawford Carpenter, CAB member.
Okay. All right. So
Wonderful.
yeah, so you can proceed, Chair Harrington.
Is there?
The announcements.
Oh, yeah. I don't have any announcement. Does any of the members of this committee have any announcements? Okay, hearing none. How about announcements from anyone else that's on the call here? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to public comment. Does any member of the committee first have any comment about anything that's not on the agenda? Okay, hearing none. How about anyone else who is on the call? Do you have any public comment on any item that is not on today's agenda? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to approval of the minutes from the June 16 meeting. Hopefully the members of the committee have had a chance to review the minutes. If not, do you want us to scroll to them, or can we just proceed at this point?
And Lila has joined also, and Jill Ray.
Oh, hi, Lila. Okay, for the members of the committee, are there any amendments or revisions needed for the minutes? Hearing none, then can we have a motion to accept the minutes?
I so move.
Okay, thank you, Terry. Do we have a second to Terry's motion? Michelle, are you seconding?
I can second. I'm sorry.
Oh.
You have to direct me every once in a while. I don't know when. Sorry. I
Okay,
second.
thank you very much. Monique, would you take a poll, please?
And you might want to just ask if there are any
Oh,
comments from the
Yes,
public.
I'm sorry.
That's
I'm
okay.
sorry. Yeah, so are there any comments from anyone else on the call today? Whether you're a cab member or not? Okay, hearing nothing.
Okay, I can do a
Monique?
roll call for the
Yes.
vote. Gail,
Yes,
Terry,
Yes.
Michelle. You're on mute,
Yes.
Michelle. Okay, and Lila.
Yes, and apologize for my tardiness. Thank you so much, Monique, for calling me.
No problem. So motion passes unanimously.
great, wonderful, thank you. Now, item number 4, summary of AB 109 survey analysis. Christina, are you the person who's going to be reporting on this today?
Yes, I am.
Christina, would you like to share your screen?
Sure, I can go
Okay.
ahead and do that.
Okay.
Hello, everyone. I want to bring your attention to attachment 2. Give me one moment as I share my screen.
Welcome, Patrice.
All right, how does that look? Does this look okay?
Yes,
Perfect.
could you enlarge that just a little bit there? Well, wonderful.
Great. Okay, so as many of you know, last week at the CAB full body meeting, there was a presentation on the AB 109 survey results for fiscal year 21-22. And per the request of this body, I've created a more high-level summary report condensing the findings into, well, just that, a summary. And I'm going to walk through this report I've prepared here very briefly, just quickly walk through the sections, and then also point out the appendix of this report, which has the raw survey findings that you may have seen in the agenda packet already. Okay. So the summary report starts with a quick introduction. Again, all of this was covered in more detail at the presentation last week, but here we'll just see a high level overview of the survey and the key findings. We also cover here the respondents who responded to the survey, and then the survey findings. So in this page, pages 3 through 4, I believe, I just have here what the survey question was, and these are the narrative questions, if you remember, and just high level, what was the overall finding across all respondents for that question. So that's this page here, survey findings, page 3. And then I close out the summary report with those potential considerations and next steps for CAB that we discussed last week. I also want to bring your attention to page 5, Appendix A. So pages 5 through 15 are the raw data responses, and I have that here broken down by question. So beginning with 1, what is your agency's name? Here, there's the raw data, the respondents' information and what they responded there. Moving on to the type of agency, what regions of the county do you serve, so on and so forth. And then you see starting with question 4, there's those responses to the narrative responses to those questions here, starting with on page 7, number 4. So I just wanted to bring your attention to this. Feel free to review at your leisure and let me know if you have any questions or if there's anything else here that the subcommittee wants to discuss. Happy to answer any questions.
I wanted to thank you and Denise for all the work on this. the way that you consolidated it and shared it is really, really helpful, both to get the summary level and then be able to see all the raw stuff, because reading through the raw responses is actually useful and insightful. So
Absolutely.
how about that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So really glad to have this power tool. I'm sure it took a lot of time, and I think it's worth it.
Yes, and it's very comprehensive. So what's nice is that a person can save all of this and go back and review also.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it'll be great, next year, if that makes sense, to submit another survey to compare findings and see, track progress in that way. And I'll also just say for myself, it was a great opportunity to learn more about our providers and needs and get to know CAB better. So it's a pleasure to support the work of CAB.
Yes,
Thank you
and
all.
I know I commented last meeting, but I'm impressed with the number of responses that you got. I know you had to work at that a little bit, but it paid off. So thank you so very much.
Absolutely. All right, well, that's all I have. And if there are any other questions, please feel free to reach out to Denise or myself. Thank you all.
Good, thank you. Okay. Are there any comments or questions by anyone who is on the call here today? All right, wonderful, thank you. Moving on then to item number 5, review prior budget, I'm sorry, prior implicit bias training by Fog Break. So who is going to grab a hold of that?
That would be me, Dale.
Okay,
Hi,
great.
everyone. Good morning. So what we're sharing with you today is an example of implicit bias training that actually the Office of Reentry and Justice helped support it for a couple of the criminal justice agencies here in the county. As you all may recall, one of your fellow CAB members, Ozzy Carter, brought to you all's attention about the need for, or at least the ability to consider what other implicit bias trainings could be offered, particularly for the community programs that are providing services, as well as potentially some county-wide effort. Jill Ray, who was in attendance at that last meeting, mentioned how there was implicit bias training offered to all county employees, and that communication was sent out, or a flyer for that was sent out. That was earlier last year, mid-year. And so just to kind of give you guys, again, another example of a type of implicit bias training that has also been made available is the Procedural Justice and Implicit Bias Program that was conducted by Fog Break, which is a consulting agency and training provider in this realm. So as part of the agenda packet, you have the final report, project report on this training program, what agencies were involved, and the impact that it had on those respective departments. I do know that the probation department engaged in this training program, and many came out really impressed with the program and the elements of learning how to apply fairness via procedural justice, and identifying what's the right word for it? Identifying where there could be potentials for implicit bias. And so it was definitely something that was well attended and well received. I will say this was a very intensive training program. I was not a part of it. Yeah, I hadn't come on to ORJ at the time, but I do know that it was a very intensive program and took a lot of time and was very cost intensive as well. So, but just to, again, give you guys a update or at least an example of the types of implicit bias trainings that have been made available, particularly for criminal justice agencies. And so I don't know if any of you have had the opportunity to read through the report. I'll try my best to answer any questions that I can. I see that both Melvin and Jill are on. So if you all had any recollection of this program, if you yourselves have participated in that, I'm sure your insight would be helpful as well.
Jill Ray has her hand up.
Yes, Jill?
So Patrice called me out, so I'll go ahead and just add my 2 cents. Not much more to add than what Patrice did. I did go through this training. It was a packed room, people from across many different divisions. There was a doctor. In fact, one of our deputy health officers was in there. Dr. Sophie was in there. First time I got to meet her many years ago. And it was a great training. I had done implicit bias before, but this had that other leg of it, which I can't remember what it was called. Social, what was it called, Patrice? What was the second piece? Oh, procedural justice.
Yeah, procedural justice.
And tying those two together, I think, is critical. I think implicit bias is good as a beginner, but this procedural justice was, to me, very interesting. And it was a very engaged group, very packed room in the one that I was in. And I know they offered multiple trainings, so it was an exciting thing to have offered.
Patrice and Jill, is this something that you think should be repeated periodically?
Well, I think some of the recommendations that came out of this report did acknowledge that ongoing learning and actually creating an educational program with specific departments would be a good way to go. However, again, this particular training program, as I mentioned, it's very costly. So it would be something that any respective department would have to take into account, particularly the class size and the number of hours that would be allocated to this. But in terms of just general practice, I think ongoing implicit bias trainings is very much important. And given where the county is moving in terms of social justice and racial equity and identifying ways in which we can reduce disparities across not only just the criminal justice system, but across all our systems, having this as a practicum, if you will, for all county employees or any agency that is serving county residents, right, and are accessing public dollars, I think is always a good way to go. But, you know, again, this was raised so that you all can see an example. This might be really intense, or there may be other programs out there that are that are structured a little bit more with a specific focus to community-based service providers, as well as, you know, again, whatever, depending on the service that is actually provided by a respective agency. So this really focused on procedural justice that may or may not correlate with community-based providers. However, you know, the concept of implicit bias, I think, cross all lines. Mm-hmm.
Since I had originally asked both Patrice and Jill, Terry, I'll ask Jill to speak first now as a follow-up.
I appreciate that. Yeah, just to play off of what Patrice just said. So the county does have a very intense implicit bias training. I've done several different trainings. I did one with the Health Right 360. I did this one that's on your screen. And I've also done the county one, which is very intense and a whole lot of layers. And Ron, who was the trainer in those programs, is now retired. And I know with the pandemic, things kind of faltered, but we have a variety of trainings at the county, and that one flyer that Lara Delaney sent out was as a result of the Racial Justice Task Force recommendations. And I do know that departments and divisions readily agreed and have county employees go through those trainings. So I don't, it's tough to like look back and then look forward with the pandemic. I think as we move through the pandemic, we'll see more of conversations with these trainings and that, but we have a variety of trainings that we do as county employees as well.
Wonderful. Terry?
Yeah, thank you. And it really, my question piggybacks on what Jill was saying, because I was just wondering what the in-house capacity is of the county for doing trainings with folks, or if everything comes in through hiring outside consultants. And I really, it's harder to gather a group now, well, these days. So my main question is, what's the county's education capacity? Is there a department or staff that focuses on doing trainings?
There is, yeah. So our risk management has a whole training program. There's a whole online training program. We're mandated as managers and employees at different levels of training. So there's a whole variety of them that we have to do as a requirement. And so, yeah, it's an internal, but like I said, Ron, who used to run the trainings, is retired, and he was training somebody below him. But I think the in-person trainings are on hold until we get this whole learn how to live, I guess, better with COVID, because I'm not sure it's ever going to go away. But, so we'll have to just figure out how we're going to do that. I think Zoom probably opened us up to a lot more opportunities. But then again, we're now facing staffing. And as you all know, COVID is still running rampant, and we're still getting, like yesterday, I got 3 different notifications of COVID positives in 2 different departments. So, we're still a bit from getting back to what will be the new normal.
Yes. Lila?
Thank you for this presentation. I think that what is coming to mind for me is, what of the training offerings are most focused on, working with the public. I heard that mentioned earlier. I have taken implicit bias trainings in the past and greatly appreciated them. And I'm interested, for CAB members and for, places that we would look to ask for folks to complete training, that it be, kind of not just awareness of the bias, but really work and training in addressing those biases and analyzing, where our implicit biases may be showing up, and having antidotes, in that work. Out of all of these different trainings that have been mentioned, is there one that seems to align more with, that reflection and that application as, folks working with the public?
Yeah. I don't know what the turnover is like in a 5-year period. For instance, it was mentioned that there was good turnout when this was done before. But then 5 years after that, how many new employees or new CBOs we might have? So those are some things that I think could enter into a decision about what to have and how often to have it. Lila, your hand is still up. Do you want that up, or are you just showing off your hand?
Yeah, I didn't lower my hand. I forgot to lower my hand. I do that from time to time. But yeah, like Patrice and Jill and anyone else who has experience with these different trainings, like, is there one that you would say is more relevant to working with the public and more oriented towards application?
Yeah, for me, I'll be honest, that's a tough question. The one that we're bringing forth for you guys to review as an example, as you see, as Monique is scrolling through these, you see all the agencies that were represented in the course of these trainings. So to some degree, one would think that this was beyond just a cursory view of implicit bias as a concept and how to recognize it, but certainly then how it is applied via procedural justice, which looks at whether or not processes are applied in as fair of a way as possible. So that, but again, that's within the context of justice organizations, right? I think it would require, depending on the kind of organization and the type of service that they're offering, and as Jill mentioned, there's the implicit bias trainings that are provided for county employees. If the interest from CAB is more or less, well, then how do we have access to implicit bias training as community members who are looking to be engaged in this work, or to help support our leadership on CAB, or implicit bias trainings for community-based service providers, certainly can continue to look for training providers that offer that. But offhand, I don't know of anyone in particular that would do that. But that's the kind of guidance that we will probably need from you all as to what specifically, what's the target audience? Maybe that's it. The target audience or training participants that you would like to see have access to this information, and then how it's applied.
Yeah, and since the focus of CAB is reentry and people who have, coming back into society, the CBOs that work with us definitely need to be aware of bias. We don't want them to be biased towards people who are reentering.
I don't know if this is a missed opportunity, but I wish we would have, could have, should have, in our survey that we just sent out to everyone, asked a little bit, but, we weren't quite there yet. So, I imagine it's probably all over the map what organizations and entities already do. And there's probably at least, a concept-based, training. I'm interested in the procedural justice, and it sounds like there was a tiny bit of that in this one. I'm sorry, was it Foghorn?
There was a lot of procedural justice.
Yeah.
It was equally, if not more, procedural justice and how that ties into implicit bias.
Okay, great. Okay. Thank you for that. And, as far as scope, and, who we want or how we want, I mean, I do feel like it is helpful to know what people already have before we say you have to do this. That's one thing that's coming up for me. And then another piece is, I do like the idea of maybe something being across the board, or a shared language or shared resource. So if it is, something that the county is using and that's extended for other, folks to access, then that could be, helpful as far as shared language and even a shared experience that we're having. So I think, again, it would be nice to not just say CBOs, you need this, but to have, something broad that's a connective experience. And I am curious if Ozzy has anything that she wants to say, because I know that this, you know, kind of came from her, and I just wonder if anything's coming up, you know, as we're taking a look at this and talking through this.
Well, thank you, Lila, for that door opener. I appreciate that. I specifically appreciate the work that's been vested from our RJ staff and presenting this actual proposal from Frog Break. I found it very interesting, and it kind of gave me a very satisfied feeling in knowing that there are already things that are in place, and there was some quantitative and qualitative data available. One of the things that drew my attention was initially the survey that was conducted prior to actually implementing the process. And the other thing that really captured my attention were the responses from the leadership in the procedural justice discipline. Moving forward, and my vision, and in conjunction with the research that I'd done prior to bringing the information to CAB, I had reached out to an organization that actually provided specific implicit bias training. And one of the things that I'm just going to concur with Patrice and other members that are present, the expense that's incurred, and also the process and how the tailor making the process for implicit bias and what that would look like. And I also would like to add to Lila's input that, you know, every organization is different, and there are those in place currently who are already providing some form of implicit bias, although the language or the terminology could be a little different. And I'm just really educating myself on implicit bias, because for me, as I probably expressed earlier, when I look at my personal self and evaluating things from my perspective, I'm very much aware of biases. And it's been my life's journey to remove obstacles that would prohibit me from having clear lenses to be able to adequately assess situations in individuals. And as a womanist, taking a page out of Alice Walker's playbook, it's just not one life that matters. For me, it's all lives matter, and all individuals, all of humanity matters. So I have to be careful, you know, when I'm advocating, that making sure that it's inclusive. And that's one of the reasons why I'm really passionate about implicit bias. And as I've said before, my mantra, when we are healed or in the process of healing, it's our responsibility to extend healing to others. Thank you for this time.
Yeah, thank you for your comments. Wow. Both last month, Ozzy, and this month. Thank you very much. You know, I know that there can be costs involved in doing trainings, but I'm wondering if there could be a document that's available with some pertinent information that can be reviewed by people, at least to help us get along. Is that, does something like that exist?
I guess, Dale, can you clarify that a little more for me? I'm not completely.
Yeah, for
question.
instance, let's say there's a PowerPoint presentation that has pertinent information about bias in it, that helps as a training tool, helps identify what it is and what we might be able to do about it, that can be accessed and be a training thing. Yeah, Monique, I see your hand up.
So I know that Harvard University has a implicit bias test. It's a free online test that you can take. I remember when I was first introduced to implicit bias, I was referred to the website. And so I could find the link and I don't have it right now handy, but I could definitely find it and provide it. If that can be an option, that's no cost, but it definitely is a very good test. And that can be an introduction to start the self-learning.
Yeah, okay. And then I'd have to take that to see whether or not it would be helpful then once a person takes that to then have some material available to follow up and explore certain avenues. Yes, Terry?
Yeah, and I definitely understand the wanting to keep the information flowing and have people have access to it, while there aren't major trainings going on. But through my education career, I had a lot of experience where folks wanted to basically just give the handouts from the 4-day training so somebody could do it in an hour. And, while that does expose people to the information in the training, these kinds of trainings are intended to be deeply reflective and even life-changing. And yes, it's good to give people, topical information to start to get insight. But I think ultimately we need to find ways to
I
get
have one here.
full trainings going.
Two of them. Each one has two.
Patrice has her hand up, Dale.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was diverted here momentarily. Yes,
No problem.
Patrice?
Yeah, and I just wanted to clarify, even though I was mentioning how this particular training here from Fallbrook was pretty expensive, I do agree that it's still worth the cost. And for a lot of the CBOs, there are some training dollars that are allocated into their budgets. And as Jill shared, I know Health Right 360 through the network has in the past hosted cross-system trainings. So we can certainly have a conversation with both of our reentry service hubs, such as the Success Center and the network, about the possibility of hosting an implicit bias training at the very least for the CBOs and where ORJ can fit into to help support. So it's just a matter of knowing what specific training program is available, the length of time and what commitment folks can make to it, and the cost. But those are things that can be worked out and worked through. So I don't want to, limit us in any way, but to be aware of what the potential limitations are.
So are AB 109 funds available for this kind of thing?
Via some of the contractors' budgets, they have line items for trainings. So theoretically, yes. You also have some of these agencies that may have taken on creating implicit bias training on their own for various other programs that they may have, and they make that available to their employees.
Okay.
I will say, though, that if this is, again, actually making a connection with your one of your policy brief recommendations related to having more of a racial equity lens applied when you're looking at all programs, I think this would be a good complement if you want to share this with CCP about the needs of having trainings, ongoing trainings for or around implicit bias, particularly for CBO, since the county departments are already experiencing that.
Does the Board of Supervisors have access to the AB 109 funds for sponsoring something like this?
When you say access to sponsoring, not quite sure what you mean.
The
that
training.
If they themselves, the board of Supes were to host a training,
Yeah,
they would do something like that. I get, my guess is with the CAO's office. Yeah, that's my thought, or at least give a directive as to how they would like to see implicit bias trainings conducted and at what level.
yeah, Jill, Jill, you're responding to that, I think.
Yeah. So that's not, it's not, so I think what Patrice is pointing to is the Board of Supervisors don't do these sorts of trainings as far as put them on, sponsor them. But if they were to direct, like the county administrator's office, like they did, as a result of the Racial Justice Task Force, and they accepted the recommendation saying that all employees should have implicit bias training. That was a directive that came from the Board of Supervisors and was sent, and that was resulted in the email from Lara Delaney. And so all of the departments understand that. And I mean, just understand that there's a whole lot of trainings that we do along these lines. It's not just that. I just pulled up my history here, and this is just a very small percentage of trainings that are available to county employees. So I did workplace diversity, anti-harassment training, implicit bias training, and removing biases training. And then implicit bias training for supervisors and managers, and sexual harassment awareness, anger, violence, and conflict in the workplace. I mean, there's just a lot of trainings available to employees, this
Right.
being one of them. So, I mean, this is already, I guess, what you're saying is sanctioned by the Board of Supervisors. But as far as allocating more money outside of a budget cycle, it takes a 4/5 vote of the Board of Supervisors to make any allocations outside of the budget hearings to take funds from one area and allocate it to another.
Ah, thank you. Lila?
Thank you. This is really helpful and interesting. So one thought that's occurring to me is I'm wondering if there's anything in ORJ's budget to do some type of a training along these lines. Like, I know that there are partner meetings that are held. And so I wonder if there could be like, you know, I don't know if it would be too big, but a partner training where, you know, folks are invited. That's one question. And then I guess I'm still wondering if folks who've taken this training would recommend it for others. And then my last question is, it sounds like we're kind of veering towards the CBOs and you know, CBOs accessing this training. I do remember Ozzy talking about the CAB members themselves having this training. And I'm just wondering if, you know, that's a place to start. Like, there are a number of CBOs, you know, represented on the CAB. There's, you know, folks from different areas. You know, I think now that I'm saying that, maybe less so this year than in the past. So yeah, I guess I'm just kind of going back to that question of our target audience and where to start. You know, I feel like in our work, it's really maybe important that we have this shared language and experience together, and it could give us more insight on who or where we want to take this next. And I'll lower my hand. I see Jill has her hand up.
Okay, Jill?
Yeah, I would just note that when this was offered by Health Right 360, it was offered to the CBOs and anybody else who wanted to participate, which is how I ended up in there, because I'm like, I want to know. And so I think that if it's offered to CBOs, certainly all the CAB members, well, some of them belong to CBOs, but I mean, it would be open to the public, because anytime you have a training like this, it's open to the public. And then I would also add to that, you know, this isn't something immediate. It takes time to set up trainings, and you guys are entering into the next phase of budget building. Those budgets will be sent out in October with recommendations. There's a significant amount of unspent funds sitting in AB 109 right now. So I think that this is something more for forward thinking, like as you're building your next budget cycle, what are you asking for? I mean, if this is something that you feel strongly about, is this something that you add a line item and that sort of thing? So.
Yeah, thank you. Patrice?
Yeah, and then to answer your question about whether ORJ has it in their budget to host this training, what we're actually doing, we just engaged in conversation with the Success Center and the network recently about any trainings that they were planning to put on for all partners, and that maybe we can coordinate with them. I am planning out a schedule of trainings, but particularly focused on evidence-based practices for all of our contractors. I'm not quite sure yet as to the span of time when we will schedule out all of those trainings, but we are at least identifying the topic areas that we want to focus on. I can certainly include implicit bias in that sort of lineup of trainings, but I can't say at the moment whether or not it would be an ongoing thing or if it's a one-time thing or what have you, because right now our priority with the performance-based contracting effort that we're doing in investment in evidence-based programming, we want to make sure all of our both frontline staff, and program administrators are up to speed and refreshed, if you will, in applying evidence-based practices as they're working closely with the reentry population.
Yeah.
But it is something we can certainly consider, and as I mentioned before, coordinate with the service hubs, which can host trainings that invite all of the CBOs and include you guys.
Yeah, well, and the good news is that it appears as though there's ample funding available, which is helpful. Let's see, Michelle, I think you had your hand up earlier, but you took it down. Do you still wish to speak?
The only thing that I wanted to add was that you might just want to start with the language that we use around restorative justice and procedural justice and how that has to change before your implicit bias can even change, which is an easier training to get a hold of.
Okay. Any further discussion or comments on this item in the budget? We've certainly spent a lot of time on it, but it's a worthy process. Okay.
I do have one last question, one last ultimate goal. That would be what the next steps would be with an ultimate goal of initiating a policy that would be standing just as the Brown Act is standing, and how that would look and how we would proceed in making that, or do I have the cart before the horse? But just really wanting to make sure it's an implementation moving forward.
So what would be the focus of the policy, Ozzy?
A required implicit bias training for board members, and ultimately for CBOs to acknowledge that training, that they have trained and that they have evidence of that training.
Okay, so if we have a policy that requires something, then we have to make sure that we can provide it on an ongoing basis, it seems to me.
So, oh, sorry. Go ahead, Lila.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say that, there's a whole advisory body training that's offered at the county through the clerk of the board's office. And it's required every 2 years that people review the advisory body training, which includes the Brown Act, which is state law. And so certainly, if this group felt it's important that all advisory bodies in the county, have some sort of other training included, it could be recommended to the Board of Supervisors to incorporate that in the advisory body training going forward. I mean, that's certainly can make that recommendation.
Ozzy, does that sound like that might meet your requirement or request?
It sounds like a solution, and just the process getting to it and the time frame. And I know that there's a lot of hurdles to cross, but definitely I'm encouraged. And thank you, Jill, and all of the other board members, program and services for actually reviewing this. I appreciate it.
Great, wonderful. And Terry, would that sort of fit in with what you were talking about earlier about, training and ongoing?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you very much.
Good, wonderful.
And
Okay,
my comments are around, I know that we're the Programs and Services Subcommittee, and that we have a Policy and Budget Subcommittee, but we could also, craft language to recommend to the Budget and Policy Subcommittee around implicit bias. It sounds like there could be a number of recommendations that we could make. And so, maybe at our next meeting, if it's not too late, we finalize a recommendation that we could refer to the Budget and Policy Subcommittee around implicit bias training.
Crawford, you have an agenda, a planning meeting this coming Monday. Is that something that you think might be incorporated in the next upcoming CAB meeting?
What is that? You're referring to implicit bias training
Well,
or a reference to that?
Yeah, and also there was a discussion about, like we've been talking about it here, but then there's also the possibility of the Budget Committee entering in also.
Well, it's interesting you'd asked me that question. I'm in the process of sending a note, so I will not finish it then, to Ozzy. And what I was going to ask Ozzy, maybe we work this into our talking points as a goal for next year. And maybe and again, we know the process isn't going to happen right away. It may, but more than likely it won't. But let's get that in front of the key individuals so that, what do they call that? You send up the trial balloon and by George, somebody may grab onto it. So that was going to be my suggestion to you, Ozzy, so I don't have to send you the direct message through chat. So I think we should probably take a look at it and then get the other committees, particularly this committee, in conjunction with policy and budget, and see what we can do for our talking points. I think that'd be great. You got nothing to lose. That's it.
Oh, okay. Okay, thank you. Hi, yes, Lila.
So this is probably going to come up later, and I will let you move on, Dale, from this point. But this, our work plan is to provide policy, and budget recommendations. And so, our next subcommittee meeting could be around, finalizing language that we want to pass on to the policy and budget subcommittee in this specific area. If we think that that's helpful to have more discussion and clarity from this group.
Okay, any further comments? Then let's move on to item 6, CAB policy brief and budget proposal planning. And there is a review of the 2021 CAB policy brief. Any discussions concerning this item? So this is not a voting item, but it's an informational item.
Right,
Patrice?
and I can help a little bit here to
Okay.
support kicking off discussions. So you all may recall that it was shared with you that for this September CCP meeting, the CAB recommendations will likely be agendized for further comment and discussion among the partnership. So this is your opportunity to review last year's recommendations. Policy and budget also took the opportunity to go through this document as well and started to really prioritize some specific recommendations that they like to see move forward for the next year. So we offer this up to you guys as well, programs and services, if there are any items here that you'd like to see more of an answer or response from CCP members or really staff from CAO's office.
Okay. Yeah, yes, Lila.
Took me a second to come off mute there. So I'm sure that we'll have more to say about this document, but I noticed that recommendation number 3 it feels like it intersects to me with this conversation that we've been having around implicit bias training. So ensure all reentry programs and services are adapted to a racial equity lens, are trauma informed, and are culturally competent and responsive to the community being served. And so, I feel like, we could add in a specific piece around implicit bias, to that recommendation. That's one comment that I have. And then another thing is just, not having fully digested all the survey results, but just seeing housing coming up again and again and again, that feels like it's highlighted and underscored in so many spaces, including this one. So I know that there's a recommendation around housing and that the Programs and Services Subcommittee has, interviewed a few different housing service providers. And so, if there are going to be a couple of areas where we provide additional insight on these recommendations, those are two that come to mind for me. Which number is the housing recommendation?
It's number 1.
Nice.
Right.
So we're in the top 3 already.
Yeah, no, you're calling out some interesting things, Lila, because program and budget subcommittee members actually honed in on the housing recommendations. So recommendation 1, recommendation 5 on mental health services, and then recommendation 6 to expand county employment and hiring among justice involved individuals. So hearing you speak or correlating rather our earlier conversation around implicit bias around recommendation 3, I think also fits in nicely.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have looked at all of the recommendations, and it seems to me that they cover a lot of key elements that we need to focus on. Housing obviously has been mentioned, but also alternatives to incarceration and racial equity and also one of the things that I think is important is to remember that we need to accommodate people with various disabilities. And I like that in recommendation number 5. So and employment, obviously in 6, those are all critical issues. So it seems to me that that these identified recommendations are sufficient and focused. Any further comments?
Yeah.
Yeah, Terry.
Thank you. I agree. The 6 recommendations are really solid, and I'm just wondering about timelines because I heard Jill and Patrice mention that there is a huge amount of unspent budget. How does our process work up in the couple of months of meetings we have, to get large scale recommendations in place so that we can get some real transformative action in this budget cycle?
Great question. So your initial aim really should be for November, the November CCP meeting, which is where CCP will have its budget workshop. So typically what CAP has done is by the October general body meeting, you all would have reviewed and voted on your final recommendations and budget requests that you want to move forward to be included in the November CCP meeting. So where you're at now is really good timing because you've gone through the various, you've received survey results from CBOs, you are reviewing prior year or prior years, because the second attachment we'll go through in a minute, make up the recommendations from the last 2 years. And so this is your opportunity to review all of that to see what is sort of outstanding or what could still, what is still in need of further support and response from CCP members. So I think you're in a good space now to start prioritizing and identifying the specific recommendations that you want to move forward. Now, a lot of these are going to have cost implications. And obviously you don't have the dollar amount offhand, right, to even know what the actual costs will be, which is why it's really good that you present this at the budget workshop, because if CCP members are would feel that it's necessary to take this on, then there can be some discussion about what allocations could be set aside to support these efforts. One other thing I wanted to mention in this is that, as Crawford alluded to, as you guys plan out your ambassador meetings, it would probably be good to try to do that prior to November, to be quite frank. That's where you have an opportunity to meet with both the various supervisors and the individual members of the executive committee for CCP. So you you're allowing yourselves to kind of get ahead of the actual CCP meeting, to have conversations with them, sort of alert them to what it is that you'll be looking to present, and engage in conversation with them prior to that meeting. So I think that's it in terms of timeline. I do know that because the conversation came up during the finance committee last was that last week, I believe, Jill, you mentioned. You all may recall during the CAB meeting, Jill shared that the Finance Committee, which is made up of Supervisor Mitchoff and Supervisor Joya, they heard the Stand Together Contra Costa report. And Stand Together Contra Costa is a program that's funded through AB 109 services, AB 109 revenue. And they are requesting some additional one-time resources of about 2 million. And during that meeting, the CAO's office shared that there was substantial amount of funding left in the reserves that outweighed the 6-month or 1-year policy of retaining reserves to keep things afloat. So the call then from Supervisor Mitchoff was that, well, it would be really important to know what the unmet need is from the reentry population, so that more funding can be allocated to address those needs. And you all are in a good position to share that. Jill shared the survey results and your policy brief with them. So they are at least aware that conversations have been ongoing for some time to address what those unmet needs are, or in what ways can we improve our system to better meet the needs of the reentry population. That was a whole long answer to that one simple question of timeline, all to say that I think you're on the right track. And my recommendation would be to begin knowing that that's in the background, right? That there's sufficient funding there to prioritize the things you really want to see move forward and be funded within the next, if not the next year, the next couple of years for sure.
Yeah.
And I would just add to that really quickly, just because, just to so you all understand the perspective. Stand Together was actually asking for an additional $2 million ongoing to support, to support public defenders for this program. And it is Supervisor Joya and Mitchoff who suggested that they might grant that $2 million one time. So as far as Stand Together goes, they would like an additional 2 million on top of the 1 point something they already get out of AB 109. And there is no real nexus to AB 109ers.
I have a quick question.
Okay. So I'm sorry if I could just follow up. Thanks. Yeah, Jill, thanks for that clarification. And Patrice, thanks for the timeline. I think all the recommendations are great. The things that I'm focused on leveraging right now are opening county employment opportunities, which is more of a procedural thing than a budget thing. Providing alternatives to incarceration. And, I don't know fully what the environment is in the sheriff's department and the probation department to being open to those alternatives. So, that's a long-term thing, but I definitely want to make sure we're working on it. But to me, the most immediate things are the housing and the behavioral health with the substance use and mental health components. So just like dreaming really big, can we buy a hotel? Can we, get some transitional single residence type housing? Can we fast track, building stuff is its own thing, but, are there things with existing empty, unused buildings that we can scoop up with these dollars, and that real estate will sit there to serve this population? I know that we can't advocate for salaries to attract and retain employees. We got to figure out a way to leverage employment and staffing levels. But anyway, all of my long stuff boils down to, can we use some of those dollars through AB 109 to provide supportive facilities, whether that's mental health substance use centers or residents or a place that does both.
Yeah. Melvin?
Yeah, and I just wanted to just make a comment to what Terry has said. For the probation department, we're currently working on sort of contract positions that would focus on hiring folks who are either involved in the juvenile system, the adult system, or the foster care system to actually come on as sort of credible messengers and work directly with our staff and our population that we would be calling community associates. And so we drew up the job sort of announcement and everything that's with HR. And so once that gets all approved, then it'll go to the board for them to go ahead and approve those positions. And then we'll definitely start recruitment and hiring, because we also been in these spaces and listening to folks of, hey, you know, for who best to sort of mentor and work with our families, the folks who understand the system, who've been involved in it and can help navigate. So probation department, we're definitely on board with seeking additional employment opportunities for those who've been involved in the system one way or another.
Wow, that's wonderful, Melvin.
That sounds great.
That's really
Thanks.
encouraging. Lila?
Yeah, Melvin, that's great news. Thank you for sharing that. So I just did a mental double take when I remembered what Stand Together was focused on. If my understanding serves me correctly, Stand Together primarily serves folks in immigration cases to be able to stay within the United States. And out of everything that the AB 109 budget supports, it feels like they're on the farthest rim of impacting folks in reentry. So I was wondering if there's a little bit more information and context to and I missed a meeting and I was on vacation. And so maybe some of this is covered and I'm just coming to a realization that everyone else has. But are they looking for money to continue to do what they're doing? And we are looking at spending that money for folks who are in reentry? That's my question.
So you may or may not recall, but the budget hearings last time around, there was an ask for an additional $2 million to expand services. And so you're right, the nexus is not there. It is for deportation defense and for Know Your Rights clinics. That's where the majority of funding goes from. They do consultations and then also legal defense. The AB 109 funds do not have to be spent on reentry population, although that is the priority that our county has given. And the supervisor, Mitchoff, had voiced her concerns that we ensure that all of the unmet needs in the reentry population be addressed before we start spending this money elsewhere, because there's a great many asks in our county, and this is just but one of them. And just one little more piece of information. So when somebody is brought up on charges in our county and they can't afford a representation, they are assigned a public defender regardless of their immigration status. That public defender will defend them on their criminal charges and should incorporate any immigration issues that come along with that. So they should be, determining whatever crimes are being charged or whatever their defense is, should consider whether or not it's a deportable crime and whether or not they need defense against that. So if they're in our criminal justice system, they're going to get representation. This deportation defense is something completely separate from the actual criminal actions that are being defended in our county. So.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jill.
Okay, there's a notice, 15 minutes left. Without objection, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda.
Dale?
Terry?
Excuse me. Just before we go on, could I get clarification from Jill or someone? Can AB 109 funds be used for real estate or for establishing treatment programs?
There was a policy, oh gosh, Jill, I can't remember what year it was, but there was a policy that was passed a few years ago by CCP regarding one-time allocations for capital costs. So if you're asking about using AB 109 resources to then acquire buildings, it's not a total no, right? There's an opportunity, but it will just be a one-time expense. And what was the second part to your question? I'm sorry, Terry.
Well, as far as services, those end up getting all subcontracted, right? So we could,
or it could be either way. It could be that resources are then allocated to specific departments, and then they will hire county employees or cover the cost of staff to service that population, or it could be subcontracted out to community programs as well. So there's flexibility in the service provision side, whereas for acquiring buildings and any kind of upkeep or rehab projects for existing buildings that would be used for servicing this population, they're able to provide at least a one-time allocation for capital projects.
Could AB 109 funds, like on a one-time, like you're saying, be provided to the homelessness of people who they're purchasing motels and converting them into residences and so forth, and tiny homes. I'm wondering if some of the AB 109 money could help to assist them in solving the issue that Terry has brought up.
Yeah, so again, service provision can certainly be covered, and for those who are justice system involved and are also overlapping in those other vulnerable communities, right? Anything in regards to building itself or rehab would require one-time allocation for those.
Okay, thank you very much.
I would also just add to that is, the Measure X funds did fund a significant pool of money for a variety of housing needs, the Housing Trust Fund. So this really would be a conversation that should be had with H3 as well as DCD. There's a whole internal working group working on that Housing Trust Fund and how those monies should be spent and allocated for what. It's great to have funds to buy something, but the challenge is in the buying and placing. And we have No Place Like Home funds, which is permanent supportive housing that we can apply for at the state. And the challenge has been finding nonprofit developers to partner with and that have projects ready to go. So to plant a project is about an 8-year process, just from the start.
Wow.
If you convert an already government building to some form of housing, it's a shorter process. The reason why we were able to do the No Place Like Home, the hotel program, is because the state waived the CEQA requirements, which is the environmental requirements, to allow those projects to move forward rapidly. But all of those projects require environmental review, which can add quite a lot to the projects. So it's a complex project or complex idea, but I would encourage you to meet with H3 to see if there is an allocation of funds from AB 109 that could benefit anything they're doing.
Wow, thank you very much, Jill. Yeah, Patrice, is that something that ORJ could possibly communicate on?
Patrice has stepped away for a moment, Dale, but we can definitely look into that for sure.
Okay, thank you very much.
And
Terry.
Jill, could you recommend a particular person in H3 that would be good for me to contact?
Christy Saxton. Yeah, the director of H3, and then she would let you know who. It's probably going to be Jenny Robbins, but I would go directly to Christy Saxton and just talk to her about your ideas.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you for bringing this up, Terry. It's an important focus. And it, of course, ties in with housing, obviously. That's one of our areas. Okay, moving on. The last item that we'll cover today is the review previously submitted CAB recommendations and TAF and the staff responses. We'll see if we have enough time to work with this.
Yeah, and so again, this is really a continuation of the conversation you just had. These were your recommendations from the year prior. So not last year, but the year before that. And this is actually the staff's response to your recommendations at that time. So as you'll go through the document, you'll see that some things were able to move forward, other things may not have, or they stood still, or there was a need for more information or what have you. So as you all just prioritize some of the recommendations from last year, you may want to look at this as well and see if there are any items here that you would like to bring back or bring forward or would like further updates on it.
You know, in order to allow ample time to really focus on this, could it be possible that we put this over to the next meeting and have it at the beginning of our agenda so that we can provide ample focus on it?
That sounds good to me. And I had another question. I noticed that the document we've finished reviewing has 6 points, but the responses has like 11 points or something. And I had remembered that the recommendations were much longer than 6 recommendations. Does anybody have clarity on that? If this is all of, if we only had 6 recommendations last year and that the, you know, the responses, they just responded to some other things or had multiple responses to.
I don't know if it was in relation to what you're talking about, but I don't remember what it was that we were looking at one point some time ago, and we eliminated some items. And I don't know if it was this set or not.
Yeah, it looks like at some point there was some prioritization from the original list of recommendations, which was pretty long. I think, and that's what I think that this is what the response is to hear from the CCP. So, okay, thanks for it. It happens. Does anybody know or remember the process of that? But I don't. If not, I don't need a whole lot more.
As I recall, probation, when they were going through these, kind of broke out each item because I think some of the recommendations were kind of multi-point recommendations. So I think they were trying to break out specific recommendations and respond to them.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, very good. Well, we only have 4 minutes left, so let's put this over to next month's agenda and have it early in the agenda so we can spend ample time on it. And since we know that it's going to be coming up next month and it's in this particular agenda, we can always access it anytime between now and then through this agenda to familiarize ourselves with it. Is any objection to that? Lila, you're Is your hand still up or is it new? Okay. Is that,
My hand is lowered.
is that acceptable to the other members? Okay, thank you, Terry. Okay, then I'm going to call adjourn the meeting. Our next meeting is August 18 at 11 a.m. So see all of you then. Thank you very, very much for a very productive meeting.
Can
Thank
we
you
also,
all.
can we also include the work plan in the next agenda and just ground
Oh,
ourselves in that
yeah,
time?
yeah,
Awesome. Thank you.
yeah, thank
See
you.
you later. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.